At 19, she was wed, still naive, to a humble farmer. What he did on their wedding night shocked all. The dusty road that led to the little village shimmered under the afternoon sun. The bells from the old temple rang faintly in the distance, and the scent of marigolds lingered in the air, sweet, heavy, and almost suffocating to the young bride who sat still on the charpai, her veil drawn low. Meera was 19, barely old enough to understand what marriage truly meant, yet here she sat, draped in red, adorned in borrowed jewelry, and waiting for the man she had been promised to. Her father had arranged it quickly, after the city's suitor withdrew at the last moment. The replacement groom was no one had expected. Raghav, a poor farmer from the edge of the village. A quiet man in his late 20s, known for his hard work and for his silence. His hands were rough from tilling soil, his clothes plain, and his words few. Yet when he had come to Meera's house to ask for her hand, not out of pride but compassion, her father had agreed with tears of relief. "She'll be safe," her father had whispered that morning. "He may be poor, but he's a good man." Still, as the drums faded and the guests left, Meera's heart trembled. She had grown up hearing stories of wedding nights, of men who demanded what they thought was their right, of women who wept in the darkness. She had no idea what awaited her now, in that small mud-walled house where her new life began. The ox cart rattled along the path. The villagers had gone home, leaving behind echoes of laughter and whispers. Meera sat beside Raghav, her hands clutching the edge of her sari. He didn't speak. Only the creak of the wooden wheel and the rustle of night grass filled the silence. At last, they arrived at his home, a small hut on the edge of his fields. A kerosene lamp flickered at the doorway. Inside, the air smelled faintly of earth and rain. The walls were bare, except for a garlanded picture of his late mother. Raghav stepped down, offered her his hand silently. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was rough, but warm. "Come inside," he said softly. "It's not much, but it's home." Meera nodded. Her throat felt tight. Inside, a simple cot had been laid out, covered with a fresh white sheet and flower petals. A jug of water stood on the stool. Meera lowered her gaze, her hands trembling. Raghav noticed. He set down his turban and said, "You must be tired. I'll light the stove. You haven't eaten since morning, have you?" She blinked, surprised. "No. I can cook something," she murmured automatically. He shook his head. "You've worked enough for one day. Sit." He moved about the little kitchen corner, pouring lentils into a pot, his movements practiced and calm. Meera sat watching, her thoughts whirling. She had not expected this quiet gentleness. When he brought her food, she took it with shaking hands. You cook?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "When you live alone long enough, you learn." They ate in silence. Crickets sang outside, and a soft breeze lifted the curtain at the door. When the meal ended, Meera tried to gather the plates, but he stopped her. "Leave it. You should rest." He spread a thin mat on the floor for himself. Meera stared. "You'll sleep there?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said simply, laying down the blanket. "The cot is yours." Her heart skipped. "But you're my husband." "I am," he said. "But not your master. You're frightened, and that's no way to begin." She looked at him, confused. "You don't want—" He glanced at her then, his eyes steady. "I want you to feel safe here. That's all." Something inside her broke, something made of fear and shame. No man had ever spoken to her like that. No one had looked at her with that kind of respect. When she turned away to hide her tears, Raghav quietly dimmed the lamp. The shadows folded around them, soft and kind. Meera lay down on the cot, the scent of marigolds still in her hair. Outside, rain began to fall. The next morning, the sun rose over wet fields, turning the mud to gold. Meera awoke to the sound of birds and the smell of chai. Raghav was already outside, tying the oxen. He looked up as she stepped out, shy and unsure. "Good morning," he said. She nodded. "You woke early." He laughed softly. "Farmers don't get to sleep late. Come, I'll show you the fields." She followed him barefoot through the wet grass. The land stretched wide and green before her, his world, his pride. He pointed out the rice shoots, the boundary trees, the little canal that glimmered like silver. "This is all I have," he said quietly. "But it's honest work. And if you're willing, we'll make it grow." Meera smiled for the first time since her wedding. "I'd like that." And so began their strange, gentle marriage. Days turned into weeks. She learned to cook on the clay stove, to fetch water from the well, to tie her hair the way the village women did. Raghav never raised his voice, never made demands. He worked long hours in the field and came home with dusty hands and a smile. In the evenings, they sat outside watching the sunset, sharing tea and stories. Slowly, the silence between them became comfort instead of fear. But in the village, tongues began to wag. "They say Raghav hasn't touched his bride," whispered the women at the well. "What kind of man does that?" "Maybe she's cursed," said another, laughing. Meera heard the words, and shame burned in her chest. That night, as Raghav returned from the fields, she could barely look at him. When he noticed, he asked, "What's wrong?" She hesitated. Then the words spilled out. "They're saying, you don't love me. That you married me out of pity." He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "People always talk. Let them." "But it hurts," she whispered. "I don't want them to think you're weak because of me." Raghav stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Meera, love isn't proven by what happens behind closed doors. It's proven by what happens every day, when we care, when we respect, when we choose each other even when no one's watching." Her eyes filled. "But don't you ever want to?" He smiled faintly. "I do. But not until you're ready, not until you want it too. You're my wife, Meera. Not my burden. Not my possession." The simplicity of his words shattered her fear completely. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the quiet strength beneath the humble clothes. That night, for the first time, she reached for his hand. No words were needed. He understood. Outside, the wind rustled the crops, carrying the scent of rain and soil. Inside, two hearts, once strangers, found their rhythm. Months passed. The fields flourished, and so did their bond. Meera laughed freely now. She had taken to singing as she cooked, her voice carrying across the fields. Raghav would pause from his work just to listen. When the harvest came, he insisted she join him in the first cutting. "It's good luck if you do it together," he said. That evening, as they carried the golden stalks home, the same villagers who once mocked them watched in silence. They saw how Raghav walked beside her, how Meera's eyes shone with peace. The whispers faded into quiet admiration. And when, a year later, Meera gave birth to a son, the same people came bearing sweets and blessings. The midwife whispered in awe, "You're lucky, child. Not every husband waits with such patience. You were blessed." Meera smiled, tired and radiant. "He didn't wait," she said softly. "He taught me what love truly is." Years later, when travelers passed through the village, they often spoke of the humble farmer and his young wife, how their little home always smelled of flowers and laughter, how their fields thrived even in hard times. And whenever someone asked Raghav how he'd managed such happiness, he would simply smile and say, "On our wedding night, I didn't claim a wife. I earned her trust. Everything else followed."